To celebrate the consecrated life, we've chosen to bring in some speakers who are well aware of the life. And our first speaker is Sister Mary Elizabeth Miller, a Sister of Charity of Nazareth. And Sister Mary Elizabeth has a very lengthy resume, but I decided I would sum it up. She received her education at Nazareth, Kentucky, Memphis, Tennessee, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. She holds a bachelor's in music education, a master's in education, a master's in divinity, and an honorary doctorate. And it didn't say in what. Sister Mary Elizabeth has been a teacher at high schools, principal, pastoral associate, a counseling supervisor, associate director of housing in Boston, Massachusetts, vice president of the Sisters of Charity, director of sponsored ministries, director of finance, and president of the Sisters of Charity. After leaving the presidency, she was on sabbatical. She did a 10-week contemplative study and retreat in Tucson, Arizona, and a 10-week program on spirituality in the context of an evolving universe, an endangered earth, and the Christian tradition at the Dominican Ecology Center in Wicklow, Ireland. So, saying all of that, she came home and she has been appointed the director of all of the land and all of the buildings and all of the people who work in those buildings at Nazareth, Kentucky. So that's what happens when you have 20 weeks of playtime. So Sister Mary Elizabeth comes very prepared to speak to us today, and her topic is Wake Up the World, Choose Life. Sister Mary Elizabeth. She's a Miller.
Is there a Miller here? Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I can see we have many Catholics there in the back row, but we do have a few seats in the front. And thank you, Sister Mary Matthias. Sister Mary Matthias is a very patient woman, a very trusting woman, but I guess you know that, because she's been in touch with me since last October. I was in India until February, and at some points I had no internet access, and at other points supposed to have access, but it would be off. So our communication was rather sporadic, but she was trusting, and here I am. And I also thanked her for the wonderful, beautiful spring morning. Yes. It was a beautiful drive from Nazareth, Kentucky to Mount St. Joseph, Maple Mount, Kentucky. So that was a blessing. So first of all, I'd like to say a few words of thanks. Thank you to you all here for being here today to celebrate this moment in the life of the Ursuline Sisters of Mount St. Joseph. It's always good when we take time to gather together, even for just a few hours. So I would say congratulations for setting aside time during the spring to celebrate religious life. And I also want to express thanks for the invitation to be here with you today to share a few thoughts during this year of consecrated life. There's a story about a race of pygmies. You know, pygmies are very small. And they never could see above and beyond the trees because they were so small. And once a year, their leader asked the members to hoist him up on their shoulders so they could see what was happening in the wider world beyond the trees. This year of consecrated life is precisely such an opportunity. We come to look beyond the trees, beyond the needs of our individual congregations, our own personal needs, and to look at the wider issues of our church and world and cosmos. It's also a time to go within, to listen to the heart, as we are called to wake up the world and to integrate our mystical and prophetic energy so as to choose life for the future. In his apostolic letter, Pope Francis presented the aims of the year of consecrated life, and you all have probably seen them. He encouraged us to look at the past and to be grateful, to live the present with passion, and to embrace the future with hope. May I invite all of us to go back in time to recall those experiences and glimpses in our lives where we allowed God afresh and anew to speak to our souls. May I suggest that we explore ways to embrace the future. We understand that all that is really asked of us is to take one step, to pay attention to one new concept, maybe to make one change, possibly to explore with others how we together could make one difference, and leave the rest where it belongs, as does all of creation and its mystery, to God. For at the heart of our call to be women religious is our being drawn by a dream and lured into the mystery that we call God. In all of this, we need to remember that we are not in control. And so our confidence lies in this. As St. Paul wrote to the Philippians, that God who began this good work in you will carry it to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. Pope Francis has called us to wake up the world. He challenges us to be awake ourselves and not sleepwalking. Not sleepwalking through our current experiences and the paths on which God is having us walk today. This is a time when we are called to know each other and to know God, interconnected and one in the whole of creation, as the place and condition in which the mystery we call God now wishes to speak to us, to speak to our hearts, to awaken us, to transform our consciousness. And all we have to do is to allow God. The awakening is about allowing God. Allowing God to awaken us. It's not about me. It's not about you or us. It's about allowing God to awaken us. If we do not awake, then we will be like the two disciples that we read about recently on the road to Emmaus. We know that story so well. They were lost and absorbed in their own disillusionment, unable to see the broad picture or to remember the words of the prophets. Or we may be like a Mary Magdalene, wanting to stay and anoint the dead corpse, not even able to recognize the risen Christ standing before her. Or we may be like a Thomas, who wanted to be simply able to touch the wounds in a reality that no longer existed. If we do not wake up, we will be like them. And we will be talking about a reality that is gone and not getting very far in the conversation, except possibly to Emmaus. When in reality, there is another and a deeper journey ahead of us. The gift of being a religious sister or brother or priest for the world and for our church today is a precious gift, and one for which we should live with deep thankfulness and appreciation. It is a gift that is experiencing fragility in new ways. The gift of a religious vocation is experiencing fragility in new ways, but it is a gift, and it is a significant gift, a prophetic gift. And Pope Francis recently challenged us to reflect deeply about this gift. So we have this year of consecrated life. We're challenged to reflect deeply about this gift, and the Pope has invited us, and I quote, to imagine the church without sisters. End of quote. He said he couldn't. And I hope that we do not try to imagine the church without sisters either. However counterintuitive that might sound or feel in our time. The founding stories of our religious congregations tell of courageous women and men who read the signs of their times and stepped out on the edge in response to the Word of God. Our time is no different, and our time is now. We are called to step out on the edge, to wake up the world, since the distinctive sign of consecrated life is prophecy. We live in a time of shifting paradigms, which affect religious life tremendously. The only thing that we can expect is the unexpected. Our time together during this year of consecrated life offers us expansive opportunities to wake up the world if we ourselves are awake. We face persistent questions of how do we integrate contemplation, deep stillness, and prayer with our resistance to the consumerist world and all that that entails. What is the place of women in our church? And how will our lives, if lived radically and prophetically, bring about a sense of solidarity, of possibility, and of wonder and delight? Our call is to listen to the voice of the Spirit, the voice of our sisters, the voice of our church, the voice of our planet, and the voice of the universe. We are challenged to be awake and alert to the ways the Spirit moves in the midst of the ordinary fabric of our everyday lives. and to work at ferreting out where and how God calls us into the fullness of being. During a press conference on his flight from Rio de Janeiro to Rome in July of 2013, Pope Francis observed, and I quote, "We have not yet come up with a profound theology of womanhood. All we say is, they can do this, they can do that. Now they are altar servers. Now they are lectors. They are in charge of schools, hospitals." Of course, a profound theology of womanhood will include not only women religious, but also will include the legions of women who are not vowed religious, but who make up most of the pastoral workforce in parishes and dioceses. And let us ask ourselves what it would mean for church leaders to commit to creative visioning about women in leadership. Visioning that would facilitate the appointment of competent women in visible positions of decision-making, in non-sacramental roles at every level, in parishes, dioceses, and even at the Vatican. What would it mean? Our call to prophetic, radical living must embrace also the voice of God's poor, the disenfranchised, those at the margins. In the words of Wendell Berry, and I quote, "If change is to come, it will come from the margins. It was the desert, not the temple, that gave us the prophets." End of quote. Are we not ourselves, as women religious, on the margins? The sacred exists at the edge, precisely because it has nothing to lose and everything to gain. Thomas Merton spoke prophetically when he said, and I quote, "We are living in the greatest revolution in history, a huge, spontaneous upheaval of the entire human race. This is not something we have chosen, nor is it anything that we are free to avoid. If we are free to reach out with compassion to those on the margins of society, church, and world, we will share our experience of God with those at the edge who are yearning for some sign of God's presence. And we are called to be that presence. We are called to be a spiritual presence in our world today. And we can do that every day, no matter where we are. This century will overturn many of our basic assumptions about religious life and life in general, as it challenges us to face the fact that we all share a common fate on a crowded planet with endangered species. Scientists and sociologists tell us that persons in developing countries want to live with the same comforts, conveniences, and opportunities, the same lifestyle as persons living in Western Europe, the United States, and Canada. These sociologists and scientists also tell us that our planet does not have the resources to accommodate the amount of growth necessary to make this possible. and that in order for this dream to become a reality, we would need 5 planet Earths. 5 planet Earths. For everybody living on Earth right now to live like we do. What can we do to wake up the world? We are, in short, crowded into an interconnected society of global trade, migration, and refugee movements. Just this past week, we've been hearing on the news, and we have seen heart-wrenching evidence of this as boatloads of migrants, refugees, flee from the war-ravaged countries in northern Africa, trying to migrate to Europe, and many were lost at sea. I saw where one woman who was expecting a baby was just trying to get to Europe so that if the baby was born, it would be a citizen of Europe. We face the risk of pandemic diseases. Recently, we had a lot of talk about Ebola. Pandemic diseases that could cover the world. We also know the risks of terrorism, and we know that this is on the increase, including what we're now hearing about, homegrown terrorists. We are experiencing all forms of abuse and desecration of our planet and the life-sustaining resources that are around us. The voices of the oppressed of our day have a different face. Multitudes of women and children who are trafficked, who have poverty and hunger each day because of economic injustice and racism. Our times call for great surges of creativity to wake up the world. It is a time to reawaken ourselves, to reawaken in ourselves and others the compassion and mercy of Christ, so as to change the world, flip it upside down, harness new energy for the future. And we know that Pope Francis has just called for a year of mercy. We ourselves and the people we minister to and with need new perspectives, courageous moves to create a new heaven and a new earth. I wonder what it would mean for our church and our world if together we, as women religious, gathered our collective energies to address these life-threatening issues. Ilia Dilio, in an article that appeared in U.S. Catholic, sees the importance of recognizing relationships, both relationships to creation and to other human beings, as so essential. For us, as women religious, it means building bridges, especially across congregations, as well as across religious traditions and cultures. And she says, heaven takes place on earth when we begin to live in God's love in a new way. She also says it can sound cosmic and abstract, and yet it's the most concrete thing we can do. I'll repeat, heaven and earth, heaven takes place on earth when we begin to live in God's love in a new way. Think about it. What would it it mean if we were willing to let go of our certainties and uncertainties? Margaret Weekly says that as we work together to restore hope to the future, we need to include a new and strange ally, our willingness to be disturbed, our willingness to have our beliefs and ideas challenged by what others think. It's very difficult to give up our certainties. It's very difficult to give up our positions, our beliefs, our explanations. These help to define us, and they lie at the heart of our personal identity. Yet we will succeed in waking up the world only if we can think and work together in new ways. Curiosity is what we need. We don't have to let go of what we believe, but we do need to be curious about what someone else believes instead of closing them off. We do need to acknowledge that their way of interpreting the world might be essential to our survival. As you listen to conversations, as you listen to the news or read current articles, listen for what might surprise you, what might startle you. When we are awake and listening in this way, we are able to see our own views more clearly. Change begins with chaos and confusion. Great ideas come about in the space of not knowing. How are we being called to step together as women religious across congregations in radical and prophetic ways into the chaos of our time? And what would it be like if women religious committed ourselves to work together as we've never done before and to live radically in order to unleash a tremendous power for good? Let's take a few moments of quiet to reflect on what we've heard and to ponder on a few questions that I'll put up. As we do this, let's remember that all we're asked to do is to maybe take one step, pay attention to one new thing, make one change. In case that somebody can't read this, I tried to make the print as big as possible. How awake are we to the realities that we face as a human community in the global world of today? And what are we doing, or what can we do to advocate for new and creative ways to address the concerns that present themselves to us? Just take a moment to look at those words and to reflect. Would you say that we're awake to some of the realities? No? Some? Yeah, we're awake. And I guess our challenge then, if we want to pick it up, is how do we advocate for new and creative ways to address these challenges? That's our challenge. That's where we get overwhelmed. That's where we don't know what to do. That's why I'm saying, can you think of one thing? Can you write to one congressman? Can you click on one thing on the internet if you use computers? Can you work as a group to address one issue? And I'm sure you do this. How is it that we have still so much violence in the world? Wars continue to increase. We talk about diplomacy. We talk about not fighting. We talk about no boots on the ground. How is it that these wars continue to increase? We see the Middle East just kind of breaking up. Governments that are failed governments, they're calling. No government. What would it be like if we were to espouse again the call for peaceful nonviolence in the face of the violence that seems to be endemic? We continue to try diplomacy. We continue to try to talk. We know that poverty abounds, probably more than ever before. We have the World Bank and the IMF. We have these organizations that are in charge of trying to help developing countries, but I don't really know how much they're doing. And then we have to ask ourselves, why hasn't Christianity had a greater impact on the world? Have we not yet caught the heart of Christianity, which is very simply stated in Jesus' own words, love of God and love of neighbor? These are Jesus' words. Love is the essence of Jesus' message to the world, to us. Seems so easy, doesn't it, when you think about it? But for some reason it's not. Why is that? Up until the 17th century, the world, the cosmos, the universe was explained by the church, the center of Western society. Then the new science of Copernicus and Galileo, and you can mention some more, was too radical to be absorbed into the medieval worldview. And so what happened? We had a split. Science and religion split. In this day and time, we are gradually being awakened to the fact that science has opened up for us the cosmos, the universe, everything around us in a new way. We now know that the universe began almost 14 billion years ago. We can't even get our mind around that. And so some I don't know, scientists or sociologists, I don't know exactly who, they have likened it to a bookshelf. You may have heard of this. A bookshelf that contains 30 volumes of books with X number of pages, a huge number of pages. And where do we come? We come on the last page of the last volume. Our existence in this universe. That gives you some idea of the 14 billion years. And what happened 14 billion years ago was a single speck exploded in an outpouring of matter and energy that is still going on. A single speck from God. It's just, you can't get your mind around it. A single speck. God caused it to explode in an outpouring of matter and energy that is still going on. So we have to say creation is still going on. Today it's important to understand that science explains how the cosmos, the universe, the earth, evolution, and all of life function. That's the role of science, to look at the facts. The role of religion is to interpret and make meaning of all the facts that science presents to us. How we continue to relate to God in a secular, scientific world, this is the role of religion today. And this is our role as women religious, prophetic, contemplative mystics. Sister Pat Farrell, a former LCWR president, in a speech at an international conference on religious life last year, said, and I quote, "We are now undergoing major changes in worldview, inviting us to nothing short of a transformation of consciousness." Transformation of consciousness, not a transition. Transformation. And I close that quote. This is the awakening that must take place in us and in the world. An awakening to an evolving consciousness, a transformation of consciousness. This is why we have come into the world, and this is why we're here now. It's not any just a chance thing. We are here now as part of God's plan from all eternity. There are important words. These are all important words. Talking about transformation is important. But that will only remain a word on a page unless we hear it in our hearts and allow ourselves to be awakened and touched by the contemplative energy in us. And unless we prayerfully agree that what we wish and are willing to implement are these words. In the Book of Wisdom, I was surprised to read this. In the Book of Wisdom it says, "How dull are all people who, from things that are, have not been able to discover God, who is, or who by studying the good works have failed to recognize the artist. Through the grandeur and beauty of creatures, we may by analogy contemplate their author." That's Wisdom 13. We live in a dynamic universe which evokes an understanding of a dynamic God. Stars are dying. New stars and galaxies are coming into existence. Creation is ongoing. The universe is expanding, continuing to expand. You can't understand that, but that's what the scientists tell us. At a rapid rate, the universe is continuing to expand from that one speck, from that one piece of energy and matter that came forth. So this is not a stay-at-home God or some self-thinking thought sitting up in the clouds. This is a God who is not just watching us remotely from a distance. The universe has a spiritual dimension from the beginning. This is a God, our God, is deeply immersed in a love affair with the beloved, with all of creation, with us. Creation flows out of God's divine heart. Out of love, God created everything. The discoveries of modern science challenge us to rethink the meaning of Jesus Christ. Does that startle you? Disturb you? Are you curious? Does this mean that we have to begin all over again? We have our scripture and tradition. In the New Testament, Colossians and Ephesians speak of Christ as the firstborn of creation. And the first thing that Christ is about is God's love. From the first flaring forth to the emergence of human beings, to the incarnation of Jesus Christ, it's all about God's love. Divine love fills all of the new sacred story, all of the universe. And it's all about relationship. We know love is about relationship. The Trinity is about relationship. And every created thing is in relationship to other created things and to God. Science points to mystery. Science gives us the facts. Science points this out. The mystery that is at the base of everything. According to scientific theory, everything is connected with everything else. According to our religious tradition, we are in relationship. British scientist Arthur Pico explains, and I quote, every atom of iron in our blood would not be there had it not been produced in some galactic explosion billions of years ago, and eventually condensed to form the iron crust that is part of the earth from which we have emerged. Quite literally, we humans are made of stardust. And further, we share with other living beings on the planet a common genetic ancestry. We are all part of the web of life. Everything is sacred and connected to everything else. And we now know that 98.6% of our DNA is shared with chimpanzees. Really? Are you surprised? Disturbed? Understanding the human species as an intrinsic part of the planetary and cosmic matter has far-reaching implications for the meaning of the Incarnation. Think about it. In this perspective, the human flesh that the Word became, the human flesh that Jesus became, is part of the vast body of the cosmos. Like all human beings, Jesus carried within himself what Jesuit Father David Tulin has called the signature of the supernovas and the geology and life history of Earth. End of quote. The genetic structure of the cells that made Jesus part of the whole community of life that descended from common ancestry from the ancient seas. The genetic structure of his cells made him part of all this. The flesh that the Word became thus reaches beyond Jesus and other human beings to encompass the whole biological world of living creatures and the cosmic dust of which we are composed. The joy of Easter, then, comes from the realization that the resurrection is not meant for Jesus alone, but for the whole human race. The outcome of Jesus' death signals that a blessed future awaits all who go through the shattering of death. St. Paul captures this when he says in 1 Corinthians, Christ is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. And in Colossians he says, Christ is the firstborn of all creation. Let's take a few moments of quiet and think. Just think about what you've heard. What surprised you? What grabbed your attention? Is there a step? Is there a change you would like to make? The last quote was, two quotes actually. St. Paul captures this when he says in 1 Corinthians, Christ is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. And then in Colossians, he is the firstborn of all creation. I have those, if you want, I can leave a copy of this and you can see those passages, look those up. We began our time together this morning with the story of the pygmies. You remember? Who hoisted their leader to their shoulders once a year so they could see over the trees and envision the future. As we consider the new story of the universe, we understand that stars die, new stars are born, and we are women literally made of stardust. Figuratively speaking, it is also true that women religious are those who not only see, but those who reach for the stars. A little quote from John Magliola. A little girl looked at a star and began to cry. The star asked her, "Why are you crying?" The girl answered, "You are too far away. I shall never be able to reach you." And the star replied, "Oh, little one, if I were not already in your heart, you would not be able to see me." Most days, women religious consider choosing life into the future. And as we do consider this, it might feel like reaching for the stars. And if you have ever taken any time for stargazing, you know that stars cannot even be seen when it's either too light or too bright. Today, religious congregations are very focused on the future. The future is rooted in the present as we grow into God and what God has in mind for us. A week or so ago, Pope Francis addressed an international congress for formators of religious congregations. And one of the things that struck me about his talk was the fact that he said, and I quote, "Our life began in Galilee." Our life began in Galilee. He reminded the group that our life began with an experience of Galilee, an experience of an encounter with Jesus, the Christ. The encounter is one that we don't forget, but so often it gets covered over with other things, with work, with anxieties, and with concerns about all that is going on in the world around us. Let us call ourselves as individuals and as congregations to return to Galilee, where we first encountered Jesus. The fact is that religious congregations today are made up mostly of the elderly. We call them our wisdom figures. how much they and we have learned from these years of consecrated life. The elderly are, in a sense, also a Galilee for us, because we find the Lord in them, who speak to us out of their wisdom and authenticity. Don't forget that. You speak to us, you speak to all of us out of your wisdom. If there is to be another way of living religious life in generations to come, it will be very different. We all hear that. We are not the first generation of women religious to experience diminishment. There have been similar moments in the past when our way of life has morphed into other forms. But we are the first generation to live consciously and hopefully wide awake through such a change. A change that's so radical that it will require patience, honesty, and humility to recognize what might be born. Are we willing to undertake this journey in all our vulnerability? According to Sandra Snyder's, and I quote, "It is highly unlikely that a very large number of people are actually, or ever were, called to religious life." Does that surprise you? Many contemplative communities have been in existence for hundreds of years and never had more than a few dozen members. If apostolic communities could re-examine the relationship between their identities as religious communities on the one hand and their ministry and finances on the other, they might discover that the felt need for numbers is, at best, exaggerated. We started with 3 sisters. How many did you begin with? 5. By June, we had 6. We could elect a leader. By October, a couple of those had left. 3, 6. As long as there are, and Sandra says this, and I believe this, as long as there are some people entering religious life who are truly called, who interiorize the charism of the community, and who persevere, the future of the congregation as a locus of religious life is quite secure. Religious life itself has no need of large numbers. What about Jesus? 12. What do I notice happening in the world today that is changing the way I live my life? What in my daily conversations and reading makes me question the beliefs by which I have lived the past? What is energizing me and giving me hope in the midst of negativity that I see around me? How am I naming the way I love, the meanings I make, and my and the world's needs? Do we still believe that we're in a time of transition? Or are we not in a time of transformation with chaos on many fronts? Do we not, more than ever before, need to place our hope and trust in the Spirit, hovering over the waters and calling forth order from chaos and eventually life? We know now that it took primeval life such a long time to emerge, and it will take great patience and waiting on our part for clarity to be revealed. A time of chaos demands risking. The call today is to risk acting to the best of our ability, knowing that only this will allow the future to unfold. We are in a period in which public and even ecclesiastical approval must be second to the needs of those who look to us for vision and voice. We are invited to cultivate a spirituality that is rooted in a deep experience of God in our daily life, sustained by prayerful discernment and ignited by the fire of justice and our desire for the well-being of all. Our way of life, then, following this path, will empower us to choose life responsibly. And choosing life responsibly will mean an understanding that the image of God that has been handed down to us is undergoing cosmic changes. Let us summon the courage needed to embark on a journey to discover the emerging image of God that will demand huge changes in worldview and therefore in our behavior. Every revelation of God demands a new way of responding, of forming community, of being in ministry. This is our time, the present, the now, to ask God to rescue us from a limited vision and help us to see over the trees as we choose new life. We need new eyes to see new ways of living. Religious life that will allow us the freedom to reach for the stars. We need new eyes to see a new way of living religious life that will allow us the freedom to reach for the stars. What would it mean to be radical followers of Jesus today? And what would choosing new life mean? What if choosing new life would mean opening our communities as places of hospitality to those in need? What if women religious were truly equal? What if women were truly equal? What if joy were the hallmark of our community meetings and gatherings? In our current reality, we are invited to be awake. We are invited to awaken to an evolving consciousness of God's presence in the whole earth community, so as to embrace what is truly eternal. And what is truly eternal is love. So I'll leave you with one thought. As you consider how to wake up the world in the context of choosing life, what is one step you would like to take? Or one change you would like to see take place? Thank you.